So next we've got Elena McHarg and Elena Mengo from Cefas. There we are, talking about valuing marine and coastal cultural ecosystem services for policy and decision making. If you come up front, great.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start to give an overview of the project that was delivered by the Cefas socioeconomic team in the foundational year of the DEFRA Marine Natural Capital Program. So the momentum is growing in the UK behind the natural capital approach, which includes the evaluation and accounting of natural resources to show their contribution to human welfare. However, the evaluation of cultural ecosystem services still remains quite challenging, and this is because there is general lack of agreement around the concept of culture and how it can be operationalized, as we already, some of our previous presenters have discussed. Therefore, our objective was to explore marine and coastal cultural ecosystem services to support their inclusion and their integration into the policy decision-making progress for natural resource management and conservation. We did so through 3 different but interlinked projects. One was a quick scoping review of cultural ecosystem services literature. And then there were 2 applied case studies in which my colleague Ellen and Barnaby Andrews, which is not here today, used 2 economic valuation approaches to assess marine and coastal cultural ecosystem services in selected case study areas in the east of England. The objective of the quick scoping review very briefly was to synthesize the evidence about and around the concept of cultural ecosystem services and categories. So there are different ways in which cultural ecosystem services have been conceptualized and described, and different terminologies used by the scientific community. So in some instances, like for example, in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which is one of the most used framework and used definition of cultural ecosystem services, there is no clear separation between services and goods and benefits that they provide. And this is because it is difficult to establish the boundaries. However, in other instances, like for example, the well-known UK National Ecosystem Assessment, and the Common International Classification for Ecosystem Services, there is a clear separation between services and the goods and benefits that they supply. And cultural ecosystem services are in fact defined as environmental settings that give rise to the goods and benefits that enhance people well-being and that are ultimately economically valued. In a second step, I searched about cultural ecosystem services categories, and I started by indicators, and I started by looking at wider international level at some of the most well-known international frameworks, which includes the mentioned already Millennium Ecosystem Assessments and the IPBES and CES. Then I narrowed the research to look at categories and indicators at UK level. And in the third step, I narrowed the research to look specifically at categories and indicators for marine and coastal ecosystems. In a second part of this review, I took and I looked specifically at the Common International Classification of Ecosystem Services, which was used as exemplar to match selected attributes used in one of the stated preference study that Ellen is going shortly to describe to you, and match those attributes to the different categories of cultural ecosystem services. So basically, the objective was to link attributes and categories and the services that we sought to monetarily quantify and the geographical location of the case study. And as has been already quite extensively discussed this morning, the categories of cultural ecosystem services are not exclusive, but they are multifunctional. So basically what that means, it means that a single attribute, its exercise was matched with multiple cultural ecosystem services categories. And this basically is at the core of the complexities about valuing cultural ecosystem services. And next is going to be Ellen on stage to present the case studies.
Thanks, Elena. So the first case study that I'm going to share is the one that Barnaby undertook, and it was a stated preference choice experiment on the cultural heritage value of the North Norfolk crab and lobster fishery. And this fishery provides substantial benefits to society, some of which are highly visible, like food provision, and that's easily valued by looking at market prices for lobster and chroma crab. But there are other less visible benefits from cultural ecosystem services, such as aesthetic appreciation, inspiration for culture, art and design, and other intangible benefits such as spiritual experience and sense of place. But despite these benefits that small scale fisheries provide, they are under threat. So for the North Norfolk crab and lobster fishery, there's concerns surrounding damage to the chalk reef on which it operates, as well as a lack of young people entering the fishery, threatening its future. So valuing these benefits that the fishery provides not only improves our understanding of cultural ecosystem services, but can support management and decision making. So what is a stated preference choice experiment? So a stated preference choice experiment elicits consumer preferences within hypothetical markets to reveal behavioral responses and derive monetary values. And it does this through asking respondents to choose between different hypothetical goods and examining the trade-offs that they make between the different attributes of the goods. So in this study, respondents were shown choice tasks and asked to choose between different conservation programs aimed at ensuring the crab and lobster fishery continue to operate as a small-scale fishery or to do nothing. So each conservation program included the following measures. So the first was the creation of apprenticeships to encourage young people to enter the fishery. The second was conservation of traditional boats, creation of annual events to promote traditional folklore, and creation of citizen science projects to help protect local habitats. And of course, because we're interested in economic value, we also have an associated cost with each of these programs. So responses were analysed statistically using 3 different models, which revealed that respondents generally preferred conservation over doing nothing, and they also generally had positive preferences for all of the attributes except for cost, which people obviously try to avoid. That was a very brief overview. Likewise, for the second case study, another brief overview on this travel cost study of coastal walking on the North Norfolk coast path. So we're looking to value the recreational benefit in this study. And we conducted an online survey targeting individuals in East Anglia who had taken at least one day trip to the North Norfolk coast path in order to specifically go coastal walking. And we asked respondents about how much they spent on their most recent trip to access the coast path and about how many trips they took over the past 12 months to infer the demand for recreation at the site, specifically coastal walking. So theoretically, within the travel cost method, we'd expect that the quantity of trips taken by respondents would decrease as the cost of accessing the site increases, which you can sort of see on the graph on the slide, which shows number of trips against the distance traveled to access the coast path. So the idea is that using the data we collected in our survey on the actual number of trips, we can model demand for coastal walking at the site based on a number of characteristics and explanatory factors. And again, you can see this relationship graphically on the slide. which shows the number of trips increases as the cost decreases. So the goal here is really to define this curve. So we base our model of predicted trips on a number of factors. The first, the cost of accessing the site, which is made up of 3 components, primarily the opportunity cost, which is the value of the time spent traveling, and we set that as a proportion of the hourly wage equivalent. And then we combine that with transport costs, so fuel or tickets, and any parking fees incurred to use the site. And we also included a number of demographic variables. So in this case, income, age, gender, education, and number of children. So using the data from our online survey, we can build this model statistically to understand the magnitude and significance of each of these factors on the number of trips taken. And then using our model, we can isolate the effect of trip costs from all of the other factors to define this curve. And this then allows us to estimate the value of accessing the site, or the consumer surplus, which is essentially what people would be willing to pay above and beyond the cost of getting there. So that's the shaded area A on the graph. And so for the North Norfolk Coast Path, this was estimated to be roughly £24 per trip. And if we multiply this by the average number of trips made by participants in coastal walking, predicted by our model, which is roughly 5, we get a per user value of roughly £120 per year. So this can be multiplied by the total number of site users to tell us the total value of coastal walking at the North Norfolk Coast Path each year. So following this foundational project, we're now scaling this work up, extending it to a number of other sites to build a benefit transfer function, which we can use to predict values for sites that we don't have primary data for based on their socioeconomic and physical characteristics. And these predicted values can be used in decision-making where there's insufficient time or resource for primary data collection. And another benefit of this approach is that it can be used at both a local site level or an aggregate level, so it can be used for both local and national policy. So that was a very whistle-stop tour, but if you want more information or have any questions, feel free to send us an email.